And I think I've shared this before. It kind of begs repeating. 1907, Anna Jarvis, Philadelphia, started a campaign to honor mothers. She felt it was something that was important. It was 2 years after her own mother had died. I don't know about you, but sometimes when those things happen in my life, I begin to think about, I wished I'd have maybe shown a little bit more appreciation, or I wished I would have taken the time for one more visit, or for one more phone call, or things of that nature. And I'm not assuming what's going through her mind, but it's ironic that she comes to this realization 2 years after her mother had passed. Well, in 1910, West Virginia became the first state to recognize Mother's Day. And a year later, nearly every state began to mark Mother's Day as a holiday and began to celebrate that in some form or fashion in that regard. And in 1914, President Wilson officially proclaimed Mother's Day as a national holiday to be held on the second Sunday of May each year. And so here we are. As a child growing up, the second Sunday of May meant a family picnic and a family softball game after services before we went back for evening worship at 6. The whole time growing up, that's what I remember doing. It's a day that has changed too, hasn't it? In 1923, Anna Jarvis filed a lawsuit trying to stop the celebration of Mother's Day. Now, recall, it was in 1907 she tried to get it going. And in 1923, she files a lawsuit to try to stop the observance of Mother's Day. Why do you suppose she wanted to stop the observance of Mother's Day? Because if you can believe this, in 1923, she felt it had become too commercialized. I'm not sure what she'd think today, do you? I think they price gouge you on gift cards. Oftentimes, and apparently in 1923, and maybe even today, Mother's Day has become about gifts. We've almost taken every holiday that has any significance and turned it into something of gifts. And you can go in Walmart and they'll tell you what the next holiday is, because they've already got set up for it. Everything has become about, what are you going to get your mother for Mother's Day? And I don't know, maybe you should think about that this morning if you hadn't gotten anything. It's a little late, but maybe tomorrow the Mother's Day gifts will be on clearance at Walmart and you can get a discount. But it's become commercialized. And I'm not a mother, and I'm not going to try to speak for my mother or for my wife this morning, but something tells me that they would rather have a loving child 52 weeks out of the year than some little brat that gets them a gift on second Sunday of May. What do you think? Today, I don't want to talk about Mother's Day from a worldly standpoint. I don't want to talk about what kind of gift did you give her? What'd you buy? I want to talk about what Scripture has to say about our mothers. And not so much even our mothers, but those of us and how we treat our mothers, what we do for our mothers. I don't know how many of you people have been paying attention, but it hasn't taken long as I was working on this lesson, thinking about the last year, from last Mother's Day to this Mother's Day, as I was reflecting on this congregation. I want to tell you right now, there are some fantastic examples within these pews this morning of people that we can emulate on what it is to take care of your mother. For those of you that you know who I'm talking about, thank you. I don't want to get into names. I'm going to leave somebody out, and that's when preachers get in trouble. But thank you. You're showing all of us what it means to be a child, what it means to take care of a mother and a grandmother, love and compassion, and yes, joy. So today, let's focus on those aspects. What does a mother want? What does a mother deserve? Well, Ephesians chapter 6, and echoed very closely in Colossians 3 and 20, it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." You know, obedience seems like such a simple thing, but yet it's almost a dirty word in our society today because we're running amok with a lack of obedience. But man, how many of you know when you were kids, or how many of you kids know it now, that life is better at home when you do what mom tells you to do? Hey, that's a fact, isn't it? If you've picked up your clothes off the floor, if you've made your bed, if you've cleared your plate from the table, if you've taken off your shoes at the door, if you haven't left your socks laying in the floor, life is better. And all of those things are simple acts of obedience. You know, the reality of it is, it's the little things in life that matter. As Solomon counseled in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8, he said, "Do not forsake your mother's teaching." How many of us, when we get to a certain age, we're not interested in our mother's teaching? And then we get to another age and we can't get enough of it. And we get to another age and we wish we had more of it. But her voice is no longer physically here to counsel. Don't forsake your mother's teaching. Even Jesus, as we see in Luke chapter 2 and verse 51, listened to his mother. You know, sometimes we get to an age where we don't need anybody telling us what to do. We're big kids. We can make up our own mind, do our own thing. Well, I'll tell you what, if Jesus listened to his mother, it's good enough for him, it's good enough for all of us. Does that make sense? I think mothers, Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 2, it says, "Honor your father and mother," which is the first commandment with a promise. I think our mothers want our respect. Not only do they want our respect, I believe that they need our respect. They deserve our respect. Solomon once again warned of grave consequences in Proverbs 20 and 20, where he says, "He who curses his father or his mother, his lamp will go out in time of darkness." An old Chinese proverb puts it this way: respect for one's parents is the highest duty of civil life. The simplest of things. Respect. What does respect look like? Well, it's closely tied to the first word we talked about, the idea of obedience. When we have a tremendous amount of respect for them, we listen with an intent to react, respond, or to do. When we respect our mothers, we're going to love them. We're going to care for them. We're going to listen to them. You know, you can see when someone has a great amount of respect for their mother in their actions around their mother, their behavior. Our mothers deserve our respect. Proverbs 10 and 1 says, "A foolish son," anybody know the rest of that? "Is a grief of his mother." some reason I'm looking at that. He just had this grin on his face. I do think about my mother and probably the night she laid awake in bed at night because she had a foolish son. Part of me wanted to say a foolish daughter, but I thought I'd better say son. You know, if you're a parent, think for a moment the amount of times you've laid awake in bed at night because you thought your son or your daughter was foolish. What are they doing? What are they thinking? And we figure out that we can't fix all the world's problems. But you know, wisdom is crucial. Jesus said in Luke chapter 2 and verse 52, He increased in wisdom as He grew from childhood to adulthood. Our mothers are trying to get us to become wise in the things that we do and how we respond to situations and how we react and how we act. You know, we make fun of the old adage, be sure to always have on clean underwear in case you're in a car wreck. Well, you know, we joke about all the little funny things, but how many of us really think about a lot of little nuggets of wisdom that we have that came from our mother? Trying to guide us, trying to teach us, trying to raise us to be respectable young adults. You know, mothers worry enough for their children. We shouldn't, as children, give them unnecessary grief because we don't have wisdom. You know, wisdom is not simply just knowledge. It's the ability to know what to do with the knowledge that you've been given, that you have, that you've been blessed with. You know, it's a crowning moment in the life of a parent when your child does something and you think, they were listening. They've been able to take the knowledge that you've been trying to implant and they accurately used it. Does that make sense? Accurately is probably not the best word, but they used it. And you're like, it's wisdom. And much wisdom can come from the advice of mothers, what they say. Now, I'm going to admit, we don't like all of it to begin with, do we? Sometimes it's not the first time they say it that we like it. It's the second or third or fourth or 10th time. Or as I said a moment ago, it's when they're not here to say it to us anymore that we really begin to realize what they were saying the whole time. And it begins to register. Wisdom. Proverbs chapter 23, which Caden read just a moment ago. Caden, it's one of the finer joys of being the son of the guy who puts together our worship assignments. I'm just waiting on the day he tells you that preacher's gone, you got to preach this morning. You get to fill in a lot. You're easy target. But Proverbs 23, 24, and 25, the father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. Righteous, the key word here. And he who sires a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her rejoice who gave birth to you. You know, there's a lot of things that we deem important in life. You know, Jarrett and Dom here and Kaylee and graduate here this next week. And as I think about that, there's a lot of things that as parents we're trying to get them to accomplish, right? You need to fill out this scholarship application. You need to get this. You need to do this. You need to do all these things that we want them to get done. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, because they are. But it's kind of like the conversation that Jesus had with Martha. He says, Martha, Martha, why are you worried and bothered about so many things when Mary has chosen the good part? You know, if they miss out on one of those little things, there may be some impact. But if they miss out on the good part, that which is better, that's an eternal impact. It's the idea when we think about being righteous is what mother does not want their child to have a righteous character, to striving to do that which is right, that which is pleasing to God. You know, that trumps it all. We focus a lot of energy and efforts on school and careers and you know, Eli just gave us a great example of a life lesson from his dad about money. You know, as parents, we got to get all of those things in, don't we? But at the end of the day, what truly matters is, are they living a righteous life in the sight of God? Does that make sense? It doesn't matter if they're an all-star athlete. It doesn't matter if they're a straight-A student. It doesn't matter if they're going to college or going out into the workforce. But are they living a life that's right with Christ? I believe that's what every mother wants. I know that's what I want. Righteousness. Nothing makes a mother more proud than having righteous children. Today, true righteousness comes through faithfully following Jesus Christ. Living a life according to His will, pleasing unto His sight. Living a life for Him and in Him. Last thing I want to mention this morning. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 4. I've alluded to this already. I saved it till the end. It says, "But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents. For this is pleasing in the sight of God." You know, I'm going to say this. I don't think I'm wrong in this statement. I could be, and you can correct me if I am. But I've come to think that one of the most challenging tasks that we encounter as adults is when our parents begin to age. And we realize that that responsibility falls to me. What a great responsibility to have. What an honor to get to do that. What a privilege. But if we're being honest, what a task. What a challenge. What a difficulty. You know, some of you are blessed that you live really close and man, you're here. That makes it a little easier. Some of you are a little further away. And you find ways to get it done and to make it happen. To each of you, I say thank you. Thank you for doing what God asked you to do. Thank you for fulfilling Scripture. Thank you for loving on your mother the way that you have. James 1:27 says, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world." You know, when I was a kid, growing up, on the second Sunday, we had the traditional second Sunday potluck, right? Well, each Sunday we would leave after the potluck, and we were supposed to be at our first nursing home at 2 o'clock. And we would sing, and then we'd go to the second one, and we would sing, and we would go to the third one, and we would sing, and then we would get back, and we would be at evening services at 6. That was the second Sunday of every month. And I'm going to be honest, those nursing homes were not my favorite places to go. We'd walk in and they would wheel people in. And as I got older, I got to realize that there was a lot of people, that the only people that really cared about them were the people that worked at that nursing home. And that's made me grow a greater appreciation for the need for each of us to take care of our parents. And these passages that I've just shared with you this morning, I think about all of us came into this world. Jarrett was interviewing for a scholarship the other day, and it's kind of one of those where they wanted you to talk about some trials that you've had in life. And so he's trying to come up with some challenges in life. And about the biggest challenge in life that he had to come up with was having to move here in 8th grade. And it's not about here, it's just that moving when you're in school. Y'all don't misinterpret that. But we were coming up with things to say, and Jet, in all of his profound wisdom, he said, I came into the world just a small child, unable to walk and unable to talk. Like, if you haven't met Jet outside of the church building, you're missing out. Jarrett had it tough when he came into the world. He was small and couldn't talk and couldn't walk. That apply to anybody else in the room? You know, that's a true statement, isn't it? The truth is that as we came into this world, we were completely dependent on our mothers, our fathers, or somebody. We couldn't do anything. If they wouldn't have fed us, if they wouldn't have changed our diaper, if they wouldn't have taken care of us, where would we be? And folks, the reality of it is, sometimes in our life, before we get to pass from this life, those tables are turned. And they need us to care for them the way that they cared for us. To love them the way that they loved us. To be there for them the way that they've always been there for us. Now, we joke quite often, but you better be careful. I'll be picking out your nursing home or things of that nature. But the reality is, as a parent, I do want to love my kids because I need my kids.